So, before we go on, I think we need to understand a bit about the terms that we're using, what they mean. It's conventional to talk about culture in two different ways in European politics and philosophy. The first is to consider culture as fine art. And this takes us back to Kant in the early 19th century. And for many people, when the French talk about culture, they are talking about fine art. The British tend to use the word art to talk about art, and the word culture to talk about something different. The other idea of culture is rooted in anthropology, and it is to see culture as a way of life, as all the things that peoples do to distinguish themselves excuse me, from each other. So culture as a way of life is seen to include religion, it's seen to include food, dress, and so on. And there's a big distinction there around utility. Fine art is not supposed to be useful. On the contrary, that's the point of it. That's why it is claimed to have transcendental value, because it's not useful. And craft, and much of what is culture, in an anthropological sense, is thought of as useful. This image I've chosen because this is a group of contemporary dancers from Colombia that I've worked with for a number of years, and I was able to bring them to the UK, and they did a spontaneous performance in a medieval church in York, and that's what you can see. What they're actually performing is a Korean court dance. So you have, for me, one of the symbols of the contemporary hybridization of culture. You have dancers who operate a social arts project, in that many of the dancers you see are not professional dancers. They are children from the ghettos of Cartagena in Colombia, doing a very sophisticated Korean courtly ritual dance in a medieval church in York, which is one of the churches which is no longer used for worship. So that, if you like, is one example of fine art. This is another. These are images taken by a photographer called Martin Parr, one of the major British photographers today, contemporary photographers. And they are scenes from an exhibition which opened a couple of weeks ago in an industrial part of the West Midlands called the Black Country. And the exhibition is called Black Country Stories. And I've included these to show the tension between what is art and what isn't, because these are all images that you might consider to be anthropology, to be culture as anthropology. But of course they're also fine art images, because they are made by a fine artist. But they have been made by a fine artist in cooperation with the people who are documented there. And there is a big program happening in Sandwell at the moment, where people are choosing which 6 photographs from this archive will be bought from the photographer and kept as part of the town's collection. There is a way of reconciling these two ideas. The idea of art as fine art and the idea of art as anthropology, or culture as anthropology. And for me, it comes from the idea that culture, whether we're talking about fine art or our way of life, is always the expression of values. Culture is how human beings try to make sense of what it is to be alive, what it is to be in this room now, doing the things that we are doing, having the experiences that we have. Through culture, we try to find a meaning in this existence. We try to find it for ourselves, and then we try to share it with others by externalizing it through a range of artistic and creative and cultural products. So one definition of culture is that it's everything that we don't have to do to live, but that we have to do to be alive. It's everything that gives meaning to our lives as opposed to merely sustaining our lives physically. So for me, culture is a system of meanings. Whether those meanings relate to how I'm dressed or how you're dressed, or to these 19th century iconography on the walls of this room, or whether it's to do with music and opera and rap and any of the fine arts that we enjoy. They are all ways of trying to create meaning in the world and then trying to find somebody who shares that meaning with you. Because the meaning only becomes validated when it is recognized by somebody else. Otherwise, it's just what's in your own head. It's just your private life, your internalized mind. It becomes culture and it becomes meaningful when somebody else recognizes it. Now, I said I would try and explain a difference between art and culture in this term, because I think there still is a difference. For me, art is a very particular element of making meaning. It's a self-conscious and self-critical way of making meaning. So one of the ways that I define art, as opposed to defining culture, is that art is a way of interfering in our culture. What artists do in our world, in our culture, is they make us think again about all the things that we don't think about all the cultural meanings that we take for granted, the shape of this room, the way we sit, the way that we're dressed, what we eat, when we eat. Artists make us think about those things again and make us think critically about them and ask ourselves questions about, is that meaning simply an inherited assumption? Is it valid or not? Do we still believe it? And because they're doing that, they are pushing forward and changing the shape of our culture all the time. Let me make that a bit more concrete for you. And I'll explain also what I mean by my phrase, Parliament of Dreams.